The crystal towers of Kethmora hummed with ancient power as the Zephyrian mystics gathered in the sacred chamber. High Mystic Veltar stood at the center of the glowing circle, his blue-scaled hands moving in patterns that had been passed down for 10,000 years. Around him, 20 of the most skilled mystic engineers in the Confederation chanted in the old tongue, their voices creating vibrations that made the very air shimmer. The ritual chamber was carved from a single massive crystal that had fallen from the stars eons ago. Its walls pulsed with soft light that grew brighter with each passing moment. Veltar could feel the energy building, flowing through the ancient symbols etched into the floor. This was their last hope. The Devourers had already consumed 12 star systems, turning entire worlds into raw materials for their endless fleet. In 3 days, they would reach the outer colonies of the Confederation. The ancestors must answer, Veltar whispered to himself. They must. The ritual was dangerous. No one had attempted it in over 2,000 years. The old text spoke of calling forth the legendary fleet of the First Ones, the ancient Zephyrians who had once ruled the galaxy before retreating to the ethereal realm. But the texts also warned of the risks. Sometimes the ritual called forth the wrong thing entirely. Fleet Marshal Kethara watched from the observation deck above the chamber. Her orange eyes were fixed on the growing portal that had begun to form in the center of the circle. Reality itself seemed to bend and twist as the dimensional barrier grew thin. She had committed the last of their fleet to this desperate gamble. If the ritual failed, the Confederation would fall within days. Energy readings are off the scale, reported her aide, a young technician whose scales had barely begun to turn from juvenile silver to adult blue. The portal is stabilizing, but the resonance patterns are wrong. Kethara felt her heart sink. Wrong how? The harmonic frequencies don't match any of our ancestral records. Whatever is coming through, it's not from our ethereal realm. Meanwhile, countless light years away in a completely different dimension, Captain Jake Morrison was having what he considered a routine day. The USS Defiant was on patrol near the Proxima Centauri system, one of humanity's newer colonies. It was boring work, but someone had to keep the shipping lanes clear of pirates and make sure the colony ships made it safely to their new homes. Morrison was reviewing supply reports when his tactical officer, Lieutenant Lisa Bennett, looked up from her console with a confused expression. Captain, I'm reading some kind of spatial distortion off our starboard bow. It's like nothing I've ever seen before. On screen, Morrison ordered, settling back into his command chair. He was a tall man with graying hair and the kind of calm demeanor that came from 20 years of military service. He had seen plenty of strange things in space, from quantum storms to rogue black holes. Whatever this was, they would deal with it. The main screen showed what looked like a crack in space itself. Energy poured from the tier, in reality, creating patterns that hurt to look at directly. Analysis, Lieutenant? Unknown, sir. It's definitely artificial, but the technology is completely foreign. The energy signatures don't match anything in our databases. Chief Engineer Gani Rodriguez's voice crackled over the intercom from the engine room. Captain, whatever that thing is, it's pulling at us. The warp core is responding to some kind of gravitational field, but the readings don't make sense. Morrison was about to order a retreat when the crack in space suddenly expanded. The Defiant shuddered as invisible forces grabbed hold of the massive ship. Around them, the stars began to streak and blur. All hands, brace for emergency maneuvers, Morrison announced over the ship's communication system, but there was nowhere to run. The dimensional rift had locked onto the Defiant like a tractor beam, but one that pulled at the very fabric of space-time itself. The ship groaned as forces beyond human understanding dragged it toward the tier in reality. On the bridge, Commander Amy Sullivan, Morrison's first officer, was fighting to keep her station as the ship was pulled through the rift. Hull integrity holding, but we're reading massive gravitational shears. Whatever's happening, we're not in Kansas anymore. The Defiant wasn't alone. The destroyers USS Liberty and USS Ranger, which had been on patrol nearby, were also caught in the dimensional pull. Captain Ben Parker of the Liberty was an old friend of Morrison's, and his voice came through the communication system with typical dry humor. "Well, Jake, this is new. Any ideas?" "Working on it, Ben," Morrison replied, though he had no idea what was happening. The human ships were being pulled through dimensions that their science barely understood, toward a destination that existed in a completely different reality. Back on Kethmara, the ritual was reaching its climax. The portal had grown to massive size, and something was coming through. Veltar could sense vast metal shapes moving in the ethereal realm, approaching their dimension. But the energy patterns felt wrong, alien, and somehow dangerous. High Mystic called one of the other mystics. "The approaching vessels are enormous, larger than anything in our records." Veltar opened his inner sight and looked into the portal. What he saw made his blood run cold. These were not the graceful bioships of his ancestors, grown from living crystal and powered by harmony with the universe. These were angular metal, monsters bristling with weapons and radiating an aura of controlled violence that made his soul recoil. "By the first light," he whispered, "what have we done?" The first ship emerged from the portal like a predator stepping into a new hunting ground. The USS Defiant was 1.5 kilometers of human military engineering, its hull scarred by countless battles, and its weapon ports glowing with barely contained energy. It was followed by its 2 escort destroyers, smaller but no less dangerous. Zephyrian fleet that had been waiting to welcome their ancestors. Return instead found themselves facing 3 ships that radiated menace like heat from a forge. These vessels were built for one purpose: war. Every line of their design spoke of a species that had learned to fight and never forgotten the lessons. Fleet Marshal Kethara stared at the human ships in growing horror. "What are those things?" Her aide was rapidly checking their databases. "No match in any of our records, Marshal. But the energy readings suggest they're from a Class 12 death world. That's impossible. Nothing above Class 7 can support intelligent life." "The readings don't lie, Marshal. We've summoned something from the deepest hell of the galaxy." In the sacred chamber, High Mystic Veltar realized with growing dread that the ritual had worked exactly as designed. They had called forth the most powerful fleet in the ethereal realm. The problem was, it wasn't their ethereal realm, and these definitely weren't their ancestors. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Defiant, staring at the tactical display that showed hundreds of alien ships surrounding his small fleet. The vessels were unlike anything in human records. They looked more like living creatures than machines, with smooth curves and surfaces that seemed to shift color in the light of the alien star. "Report," Morrison ordered, his voice calm despite the impossible situation they found themselves in. Commander Amy Sullivan, his first officer, was coordinating with the other department heads. She was a skilled officer who had served with Morrison for 5 years, and he trusted her judgment completely. "Sir, we're reading massive fleet formations all around us. At least 300 vessels, possibly more. But they're keeping their distance and showing no aggressive posture." Lieutenant Lisa Bennett looked up from her tactical station, her young face creased with concentration. "Captain, their weapon systems are powered down. They're scanning us, but they're not targeting us. It's like they're as confused as we are." Morrison nodded. That was something at least. If these aliens had wanted to destroy the human ships, they could have done it easily with their overwhelming numbers. The fact that they were holding back suggested they might be reasonable beings. "Communications. Any luck establishing contact?" Morrison asked Lieutenant Commander Ryan Hayes. The ship's communications officer had been working steadily at his console since they arrived. He was a linguistics expert who had helped establish first contact protocols with two other alien species. Sir, I'm picking up what appears to be their communication frequencies. They're using a complex harmonic system that's completely different from anything we've encountered before. Can you make contact? Working on it, sir. The computer is trying to establish basic mathematical concepts as a starting point. On the other side of the dimensional divide, Fleet Marshal Cathara was facing a crisis unlike anything in Zephyrian history. The three alien vessels hung in space like sleeping predators, their dark hulls reflecting the light of Kethmora. Sun, every sensor reading her technicians provided, made the situation more frightening. Marshal, reported her chief science officer, we're detecting massive power signatures from all three vessels. Their energy output is beyond anything in our records. And their hull composition appears to be some kind of advanced metal alloy that our scanners can barely penetrate. Cathara studied the readings with growing concern. Her people had been spacefaring for thousands of years, but they had always been a peaceful species. The Zephyrian Confederation had spread across dozens of star systems through trade and diplomacy, not conquest. The idea of vessels built purely for warfare was almost beyond her understanding. What about life signs? She asked. Confirmed, Marshal. All three ships are carrying what appear to be biological life forms. The readings suggest they're carbon-based, but the density patterns are unusual. They appear to be much more massive than our people. Weapons analysis? Her tactical officer, a veteran named Sithkar, looked grim. Marshal, these ships are armed, beyond anything we've ever seen. We're detecting energy weapons that could devastate entire cities, projectile systems that could crack moons, and what appears to be some kind of planet-killing device on the largest vessel. Cathara felt her scales pale. Planet-killing device? The energy signatures suggest it could glass an entire world surface, Marshal. These beings come from a civilization that builds weapons capable of destroying planets. Meanwhile, on the USS Defiant, the communications breakthrough finally came. Ryan Hayes had been working with the ship's artificial intelligence to analyze the alien transmissions, and suddenly the harmonic patterns began to make sense. Captain, I think I've got something, Hayes announced. They're using a mathematical progression based on prime numbers. It's actually quite elegant once you understand the pattern. Can you establish communication? I believe so, sir. Attempting contact, no. Hayes sent a carefully crafted message using the same harmonic patterns the aliens had been using. It was a simple mathematical sequence that any intelligent species would recognize, followed by basic concepts of greeting and peaceful intent. The response came back almost immediately. The alien message was more complex, but the translation systems were beginning to work. Slowly, words began to form on the communication screen. Unknown vessels. Identify yourselves. We are the Zephyrian Confederation. You have been summoned by ancient ritual. State your intentions. Morrison read the message with interest. Summoned by ancient ritual? That explained how they had been pulled through dimensions, but it raised even more questions. He turned to Hayes. Can you respond? Yes, sir. The translation matrix is improving with each exchange. Morrison thought carefully about his response. First contact situations were always delicate, and this one was more complex than most. Send this. We are the United Earth Space Force. We come in peace. We were pulled here against our will and wish to understand what has happened. The response came back faster this time. Earth, you are from a planetary body? Our records show no inhabited worlds capable of supporting large-scale civilization. What classification is your homeworld? Hayes looked confused. Captain, they're asking about Earth's classification. I think they have some kind of rating system for planets. Tell them Earth is a Class M planet, temperate climate, oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere. There was a long pause after Hayes sent the message. When the response came, it was much more urgent in tone. Impossible. You claim to be from a Class 12 death world. No intelligent life can evolve on such a hostile environment. Your vessels radiate predatory energy patterns. State your true nature. Morrison frowned. Deathworld? What do they mean by that? Dr. Helen Foster, the ship's chief science officer, had been monitoring the communications. She was a xenobiologist who had studied dozens of alien species and environments. Captain, it sounds like they classify planets based on how dangerous they are to life. If they consider Earth a Class 12 death world, they must think it's incredibly hostile. But Earth is perfectly normal, Morrison said. To us, sir. But think about it from their perspective. Earth has predators, natural disasters, diseases, extreme weather, and dozens of other dangers that we consider normal. To a species that evolved on a peaceful world, Earth would seem like a nightmare. The implications were staggering. If these aliens came from worlds so safe that they considered Earth a death world, what did that say about their own development? Morrison was beginning to understand why their ships looked so different from human vessels. These beings had never needed to develop military technology. Not another message came through from the aliens. We have detected your vessel classifications. You refer to your ships as warships and carry weapons of mass destruction. Are you a warrior species? Morrison looked around his bridge. Every human there was trained in combat, ready to fight, and die to protect their ship and their species. By contrast, these aliens seemed to be scholars and peaceful explorers. The gap between their cultures was enormous. How do I answer that? Morrison asked his officers. Commander Sullivan spoke. Honestly, sir, they're going to figure out what we are eventually. Better to be upfront about it. Morrison nodded. Send this. Yes, we are a warrior species. But we are also capable of peace and cooperation. We fight only when necessary to protect ourselves and others. The response was immediate and filled with what could only be described as panic. Warrior species confirmed. Alert all vessels. We have accidentally summoned Deathworld predators. May the first light preserve us all. The emergency meeting was held in the largest conference room aboard the USS Defiant. Captain Morrison sat at the head of the table, studying the holographic display that showed the alien fleet around them. The Zephyrians had agreed to a face-to-face meeting, and their representatives were being transported aboard. The human flagship. Commander Amy Sullivan stood beside him, checking the security arrangements one final time. The alien delegation will be here in 5 minutes, Captain. Security. Chief Thompson has teams stationed throughout the ship, but they're under strict orders to remain non-threatening. Morrison nodded. Good. We need to show them we can be trusted, even if they're terrified of us. The doors to the conference room slid open, and 3 Zephyrian representatives entered. They were tall, slender beings with blue-scaled skin and large orange eyes. Their movements were graceful, almost dance-like, and they wore flowing robes that seemed to shift color as they moved. Leading them was Fleet Marshal Cathara, though she looked nervous despite her obvious authority. Welcome. Aboard the Defiant, Morrison said, rising from his seat. I'm Captain Jake Morrison, commanding officer of this vessel. Cathara bowed slightly, a gesture that seemed to be their version of a salute. I am Fleet Marshal Cathara of the Zephyrian Confederation. With me are High Mystic Veltar, who performed the summoning ritual, and Science Commander Zethan, our chief researcher. The aliens took their seats carefully, as if afraid the furniture might attack them. Morrison could see the fear in their eyes, but also a desperate hope. Whatever had driven them to attempt their summoning ritual, it must have been truly terrible. Marshal, Morrison began, your people seem to believe we're some kind of monsters. I want to assure you that we mean no harm. We're as confused about this situation as you are." Veltar spoke for the first time, his voice carrying musical tones that the translation system converted into words. "Captain Morrison, you must understand. In our records, Class 12 Deathworlds are the most dangerous environments in the galaxy. We have studied dozens of such worlds. They are places of constant war, where every creature fights for survival every moment of every day. Nothing civilized can come from such places." Dr. Helen Foster, who had been quietly observing the aliens, leaned forward. "With respect, Veltar, what you call a Deathworld is simply our home. Yes, Earth has predators and natural disasters, but we've learned to adapt. We've built cities, created art, developed science. We're not monsters." Science Commander Zethans. Orange eyes widened. "You build cities on a Class 12 world? How do you survive the constant attacks?" "What constant attacks?" Morrison asked, genuinely confused. "The predators, the natural disasters, the diseases, the atmospheric storms," Zethan listed. "Our studies show that Class 12 worlds experience catastrophic events daily. How do you protect your population centers?" Sullivan exchanged glances with Morrison. "We do have those things," she admitted, "but they're not constant. A hurricane might hit a coastal city once every few years. We build better buildings and have warning systems." The aliens looked at each other in amazement. Cathara spoke slowly, as if trying to understand an impossible concept. "You live with such dangers willingly? And you've developed technology to fight back against your own world?" "We adapt," Morrison said simply. "It's what humans do." Before the aliens could respond, the ship's alarm system activated. Lieutenant Bennett's voice came over the intercom. "Captain Morrison to the bridge immediately. We have multiple contacts approaching the system." Morrison stood quickly. "You're welcome to observe from our bridge, Marshal. It might help you understand us better." The mixed group made their way to the bridge, where Bennett was coordinating with the other human ships. The main screen showed the outer edge of the star system, where dozens of new contacts were appearing. "Report," Morrison ordered. "Double quotes, sir. We're detecting a massive fleet entering the system." The energy signatures matched the descriptions the Zephyrians gave us of the Devourers. "Initial count is over 2,000 vessels." Kethera made a sound like a dying song. "They're here. The Devourers have found us." Morrison studied the tactical display. The approaching fleet was enormous, easily 10 times the size of the combined human and Zephyrian forces. But something about their formation patterns caught his attention. They're moving in perfect formation. No variation, no individual maneuvering. They're following a programmed attack pattern. Chief Engineer Danny Rodriguez's voice crackled over the intercom. "Captain, I'm reading massive energy signatures from those ships. They're not just warships. They're factory ships, mining vessels, and construction platforms. It's like they're bringing their entire civilization with them." Veltar nodded sadly. "That is their way. The Devourers consume everything. They strip worlds bare and use the materials to build more of themselves. They have turned 12 star systems into empty space." Captain Ben Parker's voice came through the communication system from the USS Liberty. "Jake, I'm seeing something interesting here. These Devourer ships are big, but they're not well armored. They're built for efficiency, not combat." Morrison frowned. "What do you mean?" "They're designed to overwhelm through numbers, not to survive a real fight. Look at those hull configurations. They're more like construction equipment than warships." Commander Sullivan was studying the tactical analysis. "He's right, Captain. These ships are built to attack defenseless targets. They've probably never faced organized military resistance." Cathara looked confused, "But they have destroyed entire fleets." Our best warships could not stand against them. Morrison looked at the alien Marshal with new understanding. What do you consider a warship? Marshal? Our vessels are equipped with defensive screens and light energy weapons for protection against space debris and pirates. They are primarily exploration and trade vessels. Pirates? Morrison asked. Criminals who attack merchant ships for their cargo, Zethan explained. They use small, fast vessels and usually flee when confronted by organized forces. Morrison exchanged glances with his officers. These aliens had never experienced real warfare. Their idea of military conflict was dealing with criminals and thieves. They had no concept of a kind of systematic violence that humans considered normal. Captain, Bennett reported, the Devourer fleet is changing course. They're heading directly for us. On the screen, the enemy fleet was spreading out into what Morrison recognized as a standard envelopment formation. It was textbook tactics, but also predictable. The Devourers were machines, following programming that had worked against the peaceful aliens they had encountered before. Marshal, Morrison said, how long do we have before they reach us? At their current speed, 18 hours, Cathara replied. Captain, I must ask, will you help us? I know we have accidentally brought you here, but our entire civilization faces extinction. Morrison looked at the tactical display, calculating odds and possibilities. 2,000 enemy ships against 3 human vessels and 300 alien. Ships that were barely armed. By any reasonable standard, it was hopeless, but Morrison had spent his career fighting impossible odds. Humans had been outnumbered in every major conflict they had ever won. They had learned to turn disadvantages into advantages, to use their enemies' strengths against them. Marshal, Morrison said finally, you summoned us here to save your people. We're not in the habit of abandoning allies in their hour of need. Catharas, orange eyes filled with what might have been tears. You would fight for us, even though we are strangers? You're not strangers anymore, Morrison replied. You're allies, and humans protect their allies. The bridge fell silent as the implications sank in. The peaceful aliens had accidentally summoned the most dangerous military force they had ever encountered. But instead of conquest, they had found protectors. Mr. Hayes, Morrison ordered, contact the Liberty and the Ranger. Tell them we're going to war. The first Devourer scout ships arrived 6 hours ahead of their main fleet. They were sleek, efficient vessels designed for speed and reconnaissance. What they found was a combined human Zephyrian fleet positioned near the 4th planet of the system. Apparently waiting for the attack. Captain Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Defiant, watching the enemy scouts approach. How many? He asked. Lieutenant Bennett checked her sensors. 12 ships, Captain. They're moving in a standard search pattern, scanning everything in the system. Perfect, Morrison said with a slight smile. Let them get a good look. Fleet Marshal Cathara, who had remained aboard the human flagship to observe their tactics, looked confused. Captain, should we not attack them before they can report back to their fleet? No, Marshal. We want them to report back. We want the Devourers to think they know exactly what they're facing. The scout ships completed their scan and began to withdraw. As they moved away from the combined fleet, Morrison gave his first order. All ships execute Maneuver Alpha. Mr. Hayes, signal the Liberty and Ranger. What happened next made the Zephyrians question everything they thought they knew about space combat. The USS Liberty, which had been positioned behind the 4th planet's largest moon, suddenly accelerated at impossible speed. Captain Ben Parker had used the moon's gravity to slingshot his ship around the satellite, gaining velocity that the Devourer scouts couldn't match. The Liberty emerged from behind the moon, like a predator pouncing on prey. Its weapon systems, which had been powered down to avoid detection, came online in seconds. The destroyer's main guns fired once, and 3 of the scout ships simply vanished in balls of superheated plasma. "Impossible," whispered Science Commander Zethan, who was monitoring the battle from the Defiance Bridge. "How did they achieve such acceleration?" Commander Sullivan looked up from her tactical display. "Gravitational slingshot. We used the moon's gravity to boost our speed. It's a standard human maneuver." The remaining scout ships tried to flee, but the USS Ranger was waiting for them. Captain Nicole Davis had positioned her ship along their escape route, using the asteroid belt as cover. The Ranger's missile systems launched a spread of fusion-tipped projectiles that tracked the fleeing scouts with deadly precision. Within minutes, all 12 scout ships were destroyed. The Zephyrians had witnessed the complete annihilation of a Devourer squadron without a single human ship taking damage. "How?" Cathara asked, her voice filled with awe. "Your ships moved in ways that should be impossible. And your weapons. They destroyed ships that our best vessels couldn't even scratch." Morrison nodded to his tactical officer. "Lieutenant Bennett, explain our weapon systems to the Marshal." Bennett turned to face the alien commander. "Marshal, our main guns fire concentrated plasma at a significant fraction of light speed. The projectiles carry enough energy to vaporize several city blocks. Our missiles use fusion warheads that can crack the hull of any known vessel." "But how do you power such weapons?" Zethan asked. "The energy requirements must be enormous." Chief Engineer Rodriguez's voice came over the intercom. "Each of our ships has a matter-antimatter reactor core, Commander. We can generate enough power to supply a small planet." The aliens looked at each other in shock. Veltar spoke in a hushed voice. "You carry antimatter reactors on your ships? That's incredibly dangerous. If the containment fails, the ship would be destroyed instantly," Morrison confirmed. "But that's a risk we accept. In combat, you need power, and antimatter gives us that power." Dr. Foster, who had been observing the aliens' reactions, added, "On Earth, we have a saying, 'Nothing worth doing is ever safe.' We've learned to live with dangerous technology because the alternatives are worse." The main Devourer fleet arrived 8 hours later, and the Zephyrians got their first real look at human military doctrine in action. Morrison had spent the time between battles repositioning his forces throughout the system, using planets, moons, and asteroids as tactical positions. "All vessels, this is Captain Morrison," he announced over the combined fleet communication system. "Remember, we're not trying to meet them in open battle. We're going to make them come to us, and we're going to make them pay for every light second of space they cross." The Devourers moved into the system in perfect formation, their massive fleet spreading out to surround the defenders. It was an impressive sight, over 2,000 ships moving with mechanical precision. But Morrison had faced overwhelming odds before. "Phase 1, execute," he ordered. The first surprise came when the Devourers approached the asteroid belt. What they thought was a natural formation of space rocks suddenly came alive with weapons fire. The humans had spent hours positioning mines and automated defense platforms among the asteroids, turning the entire belt into a killing field. Explosions bloomed throughout the Devourer formation as ships ran into mines they couldn't detect. The automated weapons platforms opened fire with laser cannons and missile launchers, targeting the enemy ships with precision that the aliens found astounding. "How are your weapons so accurate?" Cathara asked, watching the display in amazement. "Security." Chief Marcus Thompson, who had joined them on the bridge, answered, "Computer-assisted targeting, Marshal. Our systems can track and engage multiple targets simultaneously while calculating for their movement, our movement, and gravitational effects." "Your machines can think?" Veltar asked. "Our computers can process tactical information faster than any biological brain," Thompson explained. "In combat, speed of reaction often means the difference between life and death." The Devourers pressed through the asteroid belt. losing nearly 100 ships to the hidden defenses. But their numbers were still overwhelming. That's when Morrison revealed his real strategy. All ships execute scattered formation, begin hit-and-run attacks. The human ships suddenly broke formation and scattered throughout the system. Instead of meeting the Devourers in one large battle, they split up and began attacking from multiple directions. The Liberty used a gas giant's atmosphere to hide from sensors, emerging to attack surprise Devourer ships before disappearing again. The Ranger moved through the system's comet cloud, using the ice and debris as cover for lightning-fast raids. Defiant demonstrated maneuvers that seemed impossible to the watching aliens. Morrison used the system star itself as a tactical position, skimming close to the solar corona to avoid detection, then accelerating out of the star's gravity, to attack enemy ships from an unexpected angle. "They're fighting like a pack of predators," Zethan observed. "Each ship is independent, but they're coordinating their attacks to support each other." "Exactly," Morrison said. "The Devourers expect to face a traditional fleet formation. Instead, they're fighting 3 separate battles at once, and they can't adapt fast enough to counter all of them." The hit-and-run attacks continued for hours. The human ships would strike quickly, destroy several enemy vessels, then disappear before the Devourers could respond effectively. The aliens watched in fascination as Morrison's ships used every feature of the star system as a weapon: gravity wells for acceleration, planetary rings for concealment, and magnetic fields for sensor disruption. "This is how Deathworld species fight," Dr. Foster explained to the amazed aliens. "We don't fight fair. We use every advantage we can find, and we turn our enemies' strengths against them." By the time the main engagement was over, the Devourers had lost nearly 300 ships to the human hit-and-run tactics. The remaining enemy fleet was scattered, confused, and beginning to show signs of the mechanical equivalent of panic. "Phase 2, Morrison announced. "All ships converge on the enemy command cluster. Time to cut the head off the snake." The Devourer command ship was a massive vessel, 3 times the size of the USS Defiant, and surrounded by a protective formation of escort ships. It sat at the center of what remained of their fleet, coordinating the mechanical swarm with cold efficiency. Captain Morrison studied the tactical display, calculating distances and timing. "There," he said, pointing to the enemy formation. "That's their brain. Cut off the head and the body dies." Fleet Marshal Kethara watched the human captain with growing amazement. Where she saw an impossible target protected by hundreds of enemy ships, Morrison saw an opportunity. "Captain, that vessel is surrounded by their entire remaining fleet. How can 3 ships possibly reach it?" "We're not going to reach it, Marshal," Morrison replied with a predatory smile. "We're going to make it come to us." Commander Sullivan looked up from her station. "Captain, I'm reading massive energy buildups throughout their fleet. They're preparing for a coordinated attack on our position." "Perfect. Mr. Hayes, signal all Zephyrian vessels to fall back to the outer system. What we're about to do is going to get very dangerous." Morrison's plan was audacious even by human standards. Instead of trying to fight through the enemy fleet to reach the command ship, he was going to use the star system itself as a weapon. For the past 12 hours, Chief Engineer Rodriguez had been working with the other human ships to position fusion mines at specific points throughout the system. "Danny, are the charges ready?" Morrison asked over the intercom. "Ready and waiting." "Captain, the gravitational calculations check out, but you realize this is completely insane, right?" "The best plans usually are," Morrison replied. "All ships take positions. We're about to give these machines a lesson in applied physics." The plan required perfect timing and coordination between all 3 human ships. The USS Liberty positioned itself near the system's largest gas giant, while the USS Ranger moved to the asteroid belt. The Defiant took the most dangerous position, close to the star itself, where the gravitational fields were strongest. Dr. Foster had discovered something crucial about the Devourers during their earlier engagements. The machines were connected through a quantum communication network that allowed them to coordinate their actions across vast distances. But this network had a weakness. It relied on precise timing and predictable patterns. The Devourers are like a computer program, Foster explained to the watching aliens. They follow their programming perfectly, but they can't adapt when something unexpected happens. We're about to give them something very unexpected. The first part of Morrison's plan began when the Devourer fleet moved to surround the human positions. The machines were programmed to eliminate all resistance through overwhelming force, so they committed their entire remaining fleet to a simultaneous attack on all 3 human ships. "They're taking the bait," Bennett reported. "All enemy vessels are moving to attack positions." "Excellent," Morrison said. "Execute Phase 1. The USS Liberty fired a single shot into the gas giant's atmosphere, but this wasn't an ordinary weapon. It was a specially modified torpedo that carried a fusion charge designed to trigger a specific reaction in the planet's methane-rich atmosphere. The explosion that followed was visible from across the star system. The gas giant's atmosphere ignited in a chain reaction that sent massive shockwaves throughout the system. The gravitational effects disrupted the Devourer formation just as us. Captain Parker had calculated. Dozens of enemy ships were thrown off course by the gravitational anomalies, but that was only the beginning. The USS Ranger fired its entire missile complement into the asteroid belt, where Rodriguez had carefully positioned fusion charges among the larger rocks. The explosion sent billions of tons of debris flying through the system at tremendous speeds. "Railgun barrage incoming," Bennett announced as the Devourers tried to reorganize their attack. The enemy ships fired their main weapons at the scattered human vessels, but Morrison had anticipated this. The Defiant was positioned behind the star's corona, using the massive gravitational field to bend the enemy fire away from the ship. The other human vessels used similar tactics, turning the system's natural features into shields. "Now comes the difficult part," Morrison announced. "All ships execute Maneuver Omega." What happened next would have been impossible for any species that hadn't grown up on a death world. The 3 human ships began moving through the chaos they had created, using the gravitational anomalies, debris fields, and energy discharges as cover for an attack that defied all conventional military doctrine. The USS Defiant accelerated out of the star's gravity well like a bullet fired from a gun, moving at speeds that should have torn the ship apart. But human engineering was designed for extreme conditions, and the ship held together through gravitational forces that would have crushed any other vessel. Captain Ben Parker's voice crackled over the communication system as the Liberty used the gas giant's moon as a gravitational slingshot. "Jake, this is either brilliant or completely insane." "Both," Morrison replied as the Defiant raced through a field of superheated debris. It was moving at significant fractions of light speed. The Devourers tried to respond, but their programming couldn't adapt to the chaotic conditions the humans had created. Their coordination network was disrupted by the gravitational anomalies, and their formations were scattered by the debris fields. For the first time in their existence, the machines faced an enemy that fought by no rules they understood. Lieutenant Commander Kevin Shaw, who had been monitoring Devourer communications, made a crucial discovery. "Captain, their quantum network is breaking down. The gravitational disruptions are interfering with their coordination protocols. That's our opening," Morrison said. "All ships converge on the command vessel." The 3 human ships came together in a coordinated attack that showcased everything that made them dangerous. The Liberty and Ranger attacked from opposite sides, forcing the Devourer escorts to split their defensive fire. The Defiant came in from above, using the debris field as cover until the last possible moment. The battle for the command ship was swift and brutal. The Devourer escorts were powerful, but they were designed to fight in coordinated formations. Separated and confused by the system-wide chaos, they fell one by one to concentrated human firepower. Chief Tactical Officer Rachel Green coordinated the final assault from the Defiant's bridge. Target their communication arrays first. If we can cut them off from their fleet, they'll be fighting blind. The human weapons were terrifyingly effective against the machine ships. Plasma cannons that could melt through asteroid-sized rocks tore through Devourer hull plating like paper. Fusion missiles designed to crack moons reduced entire enemy vessels to expanding clouds of superheated gas. "Their shields are down," Bennett reported as the Defiant closed in on the command ship. "Hull breaches on multiple decks." "Finish it," Morrison ordered. The final shot came from all three human ships simultaneously. Concentrated plasma beams struck the Devourer command vessel from three different angles, overloading its power systems and causing a cascade failure that tore the massive ship apart from the inside. With their command ship destroyed, the remaining Devourer fleet lost all coordination. The individual ships began to flee in random directions, their hive mind broken and their programming corrupted by the loss of their central controller. Fleet Marshal Cathara watched the tactical display in stunned silence as the enemy fleet scattered. Where minutes before there had been an unstoppable armada, now there were only confused individual ships fleeing in panic. "It's over," she whispered. "They're running." Morrison nodded, but his expression remained serious. "This battle is over, Marshal, but the war is just beginning. We've shown them that they can be beaten. Now they'll adapt, and the next time we face them, they'll be ready for our tactics." Dr. Foster looked up from her analysis console. "Captain, I'm reading massive data transmissions from the fleeing ships. They're uploading everything they learn about our tactics to their home network." "Let them," Morrison said. "By the time they figure out how to counter what we did here, we'll have developed new tactics. That's what humans do best. We adapt. Faster than our enemies can learn." The Zephyrians looked at each other in amazement. They had witnessed the impossible. 3 ships from a death world had defeated a fleet that had conquered 12 star systems. And the humans were already planning for the next battle. 3 days after the battle, the USS Defiant floated quietly near the Zephyrian capital world of Kethmora. The great crystal cities on the planet's surface sparkled in the light of their star, and Captain Morrison could see why these people had never learned to fight. Their entire civilization was built around beauty and harmony, not warfare and survival. The aftermath of the battle had been swift. The surviving Devourer ships had fled the system in chaos, their coordination network shattered beyond repair. But the victory had come at a cost. The gravitational disruptions caused by the human tactics had damaged several Zephyrian colonies, and the debris from the destroyed ships would be a navigation hazard for years to come. Morrison stood in the Eva conference room aboard his ship, looking out at the alien fleet that surrounded them. But now those ships weren't threatening enemies. They were allies, and some of them were already showing modifications based on human weapons technology. "Captain," Commander Sullivan said as she entered the room, "the Zephyrian delegation is ready for the final negotiations." Morrison nodded. The past 3 days had been filled with discussions about technology sharing, defensive treaties, and the future relationship between their two species. It was delicate work, requiring diplomacy skills that most military officers never needed to develop. Fleet Marshal Cathara entered the room, followed by High Mystic Veltar and Science Commander Zethan. But there was a new member of their delegation, a young Zephyrian engineer named Kolva, who had been studying human technology with enthusiasm that surprised everyone. "Captain Morrison," Cathara said, her voice carrying new confidence that hadn't been there before the battle. "We have completed our analysis of the battle data. What your people accomplished was beyond anything we thought possible. We did what we had to do, Marshal," Morrison replied. "The question now is what happens next." Veltar stepped forward, his expression thoughtful. "We have learned much from observing your tactics, Captain. Not just about warfare, but about survival itself. Our people have lived in peace for so long that we forgot the universe can be a dangerous place." Dr. Foster, who had become the unofficial ambassador between the two species, looked up from her datapad. "The question is whether your people are willing to change. Adopting human military doctrine means accepting a different way of thinking about the universe." Zethan nodded slowly. "We understand this, Dr. Foster. We have seen what peace without strength leads to. The Devourers would have destroyed our entire civilization if you had not been here." Morrison studied the alien faces around the table. 3 days ago, these beings had been terrified of humans. Now they were asking to learn from them. It was a transformation that spoke well of their intelligence and adaptability. "What exactly are you proposing?" Morrison asked. Cathara activated a holographic display that showed star charts of the local galactic region. "The Devourers came from this direction, Captain. Our long-range sensors indicate there are more of them out there, possibly millions. Of ships. They represent a threat not just to us, but to every peaceful civilization in this part of the galaxy." "You want to hunt them down," Morrison said. "It wasn't a question." "We want to protect ourselves and others," Veltar corrected. "But we need to learn how to fight effectively." "Will you teach us?" Morrison looked at his officers. Sullivan nodded slightly, as did Dr. Foster. Lieutenant Commander Shaw, who had been working closely with Zephyrian communications officers, spoke. Captain, I've been monitoring transmissions from other systems. A Devourer defeat here has been noticed. Other species are asking questions about who stopped them." "And," Morrison prompted, "some of them want to learn how to defend themselves too. The word is spreading that someone finally found a way to beat the machines." Morrison leaned back in his chair, considering the implications. Humanity had accidentally become the protectors of an entire galactic region. It was a responsibility that came with both opportunities and dangers. "If we agree to this," Morrison said carefully, "we're not just forming an alliance with your people. We're committing to a war that could last decades." Cathara's orange eyes met his directly. "Captain, 3 days ago my people were preparing to die. Today, we have hope. We are willing to fight for that hope, but we need teachers who understand how to win." Dr. Foster added, "Captain, the Zephyrians have technology that could be incredibly useful to us. Their dimensional manipulation abilities could revolutionize space travel, and their bioengineering could help us develop better medical treatments." Morrison looked around the table at both species. Humans who had spent their lives fighting for survival, and aliens who were just learning what that meant. It was an unlikely partnership, but it might be exactly what both sides needed. "Very well," Morrison said finally. "We'll establish a joint task force. Human tactical knowledge combined with Zephyrian technology and resources. But there are conditions." "Name them," Cathara said immediately. "First, any weapons we develop together will never be used against civilian populations. Second, we maintain strict protocols about when and how these weapons can be used. Third, we share all intelligence about threats like the Devourers with both our governments." Veltar bowed his head. "These terms are acceptable, Captain. When do we begin?" "We've already begun," Morrison replied. "Lieutenant Shaw has volunteered to remain here as a permanent liaison officer. He'll work with your people to establish communication protocols and begin basic tactical training." Shaw stepped forward with a slight smile. "I've always been interested in xenology, Captain. This seems like the perfect opportunity to learn. Kolva, the young Zephyrian engineer, spoke for the first time. Captain Morrison, I have been studying your ship designs. With your permission, I would like to propose modifications that could improve both our technologies. What kind of modifications? Chief Engineer Rodriguez asked over the intercom. Your weapons are incredibly powerful, but they require enormous amounts of energy. Our bioengineering might be able to create more efficient power systems. And your defensive systems could benefit from our shield harmonics. Morrison exchanged glances with his officers. The enthusiasm in the young alien's voice reminded him of human engineers when they found a new challenge to solve. We'll consider it, Morrison said. But any joint development projects will need approval from both our governments. The negotiations continued for several more hours, covering everything from technology transfer protocols to rules of engagement for the Joint Task Force. By the end, they had established the framework for what would become the first interspecies military alliance in recorded galactic history. As the Zephyrian delegation prepared to leave, Cathara turned back to Morrison. Captain, may I ask you something personal? Of course, Marshal. Before you arrived, we thought the universe was a place where reason and peace could solve any problem. Now we know better. How do your people maintain hope when you know how dangerous the universe really is? Morrison thought for a moment before answering. We don't hope for a safe universe, Marshal. We work to make it safer. There's a difference between hoping for peace and being willing to fight for it. Veltar nodded slowly. That is a very human way of thinking. Perhaps it is a way of thinking we need to learn. After the aliens left, Morrison stood alone in the conference room, looking out at the combined fleet. In a few days, the human ships would return to their own dimension, but they would be back. The accidental summoning had created something neither species had expected, a partnership that might change the balance of power in the galaxy. Commander Sullivan joined him at the window. Think it will work, Captain? Morrison watched as a Zephyrian ship practiced maneuvers alongside one of their destroyers. Amy, 3 days ago, these people didn't even know what a tactical formation was. Look at them now. They learn fast, Sullivan. Agreed. Fast enough, I hope, Morrison said. Because something tells me the Devourers were just the beginning.